Well, hello, thanks for joining. Let's get comfy and maybe grab your favorite John Stamos body pillow and enter the big spoon position. How about we put a little burning fireplace in the bottom corner for some ambient noise? Where's the fireplace? Come on, guys, get the fireplace added. Oh, there it is. Very nice. Hard to find good help these days. Let's get some slight fire embers added. Slight embers, please. That's better, thank you. And also, my friends, we have put countless hours into making this for you, and if you could please like and subscribe, it helps us out more than you can imagine. Also, let us know what you think of this concept and story, and your location in this world. We are always curious on where our viewers are from. Now let's get started on this epic journey. Ah yes, the Titanic. A floating cathedral of steel, dreams and hubris. What could possibly go wrong? You, full of optimism and upper-class smugness, bought yourself a ticket aboard what was promised to be the safest, most luxurious way to cross the Atlantic. It was 1912, and you were about to find out how expensive irony could be. Let's review the investment, shall we? If you were one of the elite, a connoisseur of monocles and meat-carved tableside, you might have purchased a parlour suite, the most luxurious accommodation available. In 1912, it cost £870, which is about $113,075 in today's money. That's right. To board a ship that came with a complimentary iceberg. For the more modest first-class traveller, the standard first-class berth went for a mere £30, or roughly $3,899 now. A bargain, especially if you enjoy five-star dining, Turkish baths, and watching your life flash before your eyes in velvet evening wear. Perhaps you were frugal and refined and settled on second class, a respectable option at £12, now worth about $1,559. That price got you clean linens, tolerable cutlery, and the smug satisfaction of knowing you weren't down with the cargo and goats. And then there was third class. Tickets ranged from £3 to £8, now equivalent to about $389 to $1,039. You shared a room with strangers, walked uphill both ways just to find a toilet, and yet somehow you still had better odds of survival than those in the suite with the chandelier. Now imagine this, you've just handed over what amounts to a small fortune, donned your finest cravat, and boarded the most opulent ship ever built. You're eating consommé with 12 spoons, bragging about telegrams and discussing how terribly vulgar the Carpathia is. Meanwhile, destiny is greasing up an iceberg with your name on it. You fall asleep in a hand-carved oak bed, full from an 11-course dinner, dreaming of New York. You wake up to the Atlantic Ocean politely entering your room like it had a reservation. And suddenly, that $113,000 suite seems less like a status symbol and more like a submersible trap. As panic breaks out, you learn that no matter how many pounds you spent, or how many forks you know how to use, there are only enough lifeboats for half the passengers. And the violinist? Oh, he's still playing, because this ship was brought to you by theatre kids and engineering overconfidence. Third class, for all its humble conditions, begins to look like the real luxury. No grand staircase, but plenty of time to figure out where the lifeboats are. Meanwhile, first-class passengers are still trying to decide which fur coat to die in. And let's be honest, when you fork over what's now the price of a Tesla for a 3-day cruise, you don't expect your vacation to end with a historical plaque and a James Cameron film. But here you are. Welcome to the Titanic, where the champagne was chilled, the linens were pressed, and the karma was instant. So please, pour yourself a strong cup of tea, straighten your tie, and settle in for a magnificent tale of steel, status, and sorrow. Because if there's one thing this story teaches us, it's this. The more you paid, the faster you froze. And yes, the band did play on. In the early years of the 20th century, the world stood at the precipice of a new era, one of innovation, power, and global ambition. And at the heart of this bold new century was a vision unlike any the seas had ever known. A ship so grand, so immense, that it would come to symbolize both the pinnacle of human engineering and the price of human hubris. The RMS Titanic was not born in a moment. It was forged over years in sweat, steel, and vision. Commissioned by the White Star Line, the Titanic was one of 3 sister ships conceived by the company to rival the luxury and speed of their transatlantic competitors. Her siblings, the RMS Olympic and the HMHS Britannic, would each play a role in history, but it was the Titanic that would be remembered most. Construction began on March 31st, 1909, in the massive Harland and Wolff shipyard in Belfast, Northern Ireland. Over 15,000 workers toiled daily on what would become the largest man-made moving object on Earth. At 882 feet long, weighing over 46,000 tons, and towering more than 100 feet from keel to bridge, she was an engineering marvel. The ship's skeleton was built with over 3 million rivets. It took nearly 3 years to complete her hull and superstructure. Inside, the Titanic was a floating palace. First-class suites rivaled the most luxurious hotels of the era. Grand staircases, wood-paneled dining rooms, and Turkish baths created an opulence never before seen on the open sea. No expense was spared. By May 31st, 1911, Titanic was ready for launch. Over 100,000 spectators gathered as the immense ship slid down the slipway into the River Lagan. It took just 62 seconds for the behemoth to reach the water. No propellers or engines had been installed yet. It was just her shell. But even then, the world was watching. Her interiors were outfitted over the next 10 months. She boasted a gymnasium, squash court, libraries, electric elevators, and even a swimming pool, astounding luxuries in 1912. First-class passengers would dine on fine French cuisine. Second class was akin to today's business class, and third class, steerage, was more comfortable than many passengers' homes. But Titanic was more than a ship. She was a statement of power, of progress, of mankind's belief that no force, natural or otherwise, could challenge human ingenuity. By the time sea trials commenced in April 1912, she was ready to carry more than 2,200 souls across the Atlantic, from Southampton to New York City. But fate had other plans. The Titanic's maiden voyage began on April 10th, 1912. Excitement buzzed in the air as crowds lined the docks in Southampton to catch a glimpse of the world's largest passenger liner. Tugboats guided her away from the quay as bands played and flags waved. She was bound for Cherbourg, France, then Queenstown, Ireland, before her final course was set westward toward New York City. On board were some of the richest people of the era: John Jacob Astor IV, Benjamin Guggenheim, and Isidor Straus. But alongside them were hundreds of emigrants, families with little more than hope and a ticket in steerage, all chasing the American dream. The ship was divided not just by class, but by experience. First-class guests walked polished promenades and dined on multi-course meals served on fine china. Third-class passengers slept several to a room and brought their own food for the journey, but even those in steerage spoke with wonder about the Titanic's size and beauty. Everyone aboard knew they were part of something historic. The weather was fair as Titanic steamed westward. She averaged around 21 knots, fast, but not her top speed. Captain Edward J. Smith, a seasoned mariner nearing retirement, was in command. He had overseen Olympic's maiden voyage and was considered a lucky charm for White Star Line. Yet beneath the calm exterior, warnings trickled in. Iceberg reports came from ships ahead on the route. The Mesaba, the Californian, the Coronia, all had spotted field ice and drifting bergs. Messages were received, logged, acknowledged, but not always acted upon. On board, 2 Marconi wireless operators worked tirelessly, handling passenger messages and navigation alerts. Jack Phillips and Harold Bride were overwhelmed with social telegrams from first-class passengers. One ice warning from the Californian was even delayed, not out of negligence, but sheer busyness. The ship's communication room was buzzing with gossip and greetings, not warnings and danger. April 14th arrived quietly. The temperature dropped. The sea turned oddly still, like glass. Veteran sailors would later say the silence was unsettling. There was no moon. No waves, just stars above and black water below. At 11:40 p.m., the call rang out from the crow's nest. Iceberg, right ahead. What followed was less a collision than a glancing blow, but devastating nonetheless. The iceberg tore along the starboard side, popping rivets and slashing open 6 watertight compartments. Titanic could float with 4 flooded. She could not survive 6. Within minutes, she began to list. Below deck, chaos spread. Passengers felt the impact, some lightly, some not at all. But soon the truth surfaced. Crew members rushed to wake sleeping families. Engineers raced to shut valves and assess the damage, and then the unthinkable began. Lifeboats were readied. Of the 2,208 people aboard Titanic, there were lifeboats for only 1,178. Worse, the crew had never practiced a proper evacuation. Early lifeboats left half full. Women and children first, an ideal rarely followed to the letter. Officers interpreted the rule inconsistently. Class sometimes dictated survival. And through it all, the band played. Led by Wallace Hartley, they moved from the grand staircase to the deck, performing hymns and waltzes to calm passengers. Survivors would recall them playing Nearer, My God to Thee, as the ship slipped below the waves. Whether that's entirely true or part of Titanic's legend hardly matters. The image endures. At 2:20 a.m. on April 15th, Titanic broke in two and vanished beneath the surface. Over 1,500 souls were lost. The water was below freezing. Most who jumped or fell died within minutes from hypothermia. The lifeboats, scattered and frightened, waited in the blackness. Some returned to look for survivors. Most did not. The RMS Carpathia arrived at dawn, having steamed full speed through the night to answer Titanic's distress calls. She rescued 705 survivors. Among them were women wrapped in blankets, children crying for parents who never came, and crewmen stunned into silence. The greatest ship ever built was gone, and the world would never be the same. In the days that followed the sinking, the world woke to horror and disbelief. Newspapers ran bold headlines, some even before the full toll was known. Titanic lost with 1,500 souls, declared the New York Times. Questions surfaced immediately. How could the most advanced ship in the world vanish so suddenly? How could there have been so few lifeboats? How could so many lives be lost in such a modern age? Grief turned to outrage. Inquiries were launched on both sides of the Atlantic. The British Board of Trade and the United States Senate each held investigations. Testimonies from survivors painted a haunting picture: confusion, lack of clear orders, boats lowered with empty seats and doors locked between classes. The myth of the unsinkable had drowned alongside the Titanic, and the public demanded accountability. Regulations changed almost immediately. Ships were now required to carry enough lifeboats for all aboard, and round-the-clock wireless communications became law. But even amid the tragedy, moments of humanity emerged. Stories of selflessness and courage spread, of Isidor Straus refusing a lifeboat seat so a woman could take it, of the ship's baker surviving in the icy water for hours due to alcohol in his system, of the band's final performance offering peace in chaos. Some accounts were romanticized, others verified, but all contributed to the mythos of Titanic as more than just a disaster. It was a crucible of character. Meanwhile, survivors tried to rebuild. Many had lost family members, wealth, or both. Some, like Molly Brown, later dubbed the unsinkable Molly Brown, became vocal advocates for safety reforms and aid to fellow survivors. For others, silence was their only refuge. The trauma haunted them, resurfacing in dreams and silence at family tables. As the years passed, the Titanic began to drift into legend. Novels, songs, and silent films kept her memory alive. Artifacts appeared in museums. Ghost stories flourished. People whispered that Titanic was cursed. From the day she was launched without the customary champagne bottle breaking, to the tale of the cursed Egyptian mummy said to be aboard in the cargo hold. These myths blended with reality in the public imagination. And then in 1985, something extraordinary happened. A joint French-American expedition led by Dr. Robert Ballard finally located the wreck. 2.5 miles beneath the surface, Titanic lay split in two on the ocean floor, her bow still eerily intact, her stern twisted and shattered. Rusticles, strange rust formations, clung to her iron bones, shoes, porcelain, chandeliers, frozen echoes of another time. The images shocked the world. What had seemed mythic was now tangible. The discovery reignited global fascination. Documentaries, books, and exhibits followed. Scientists studied the wreck to understand not only its decay but its significance. Debate raged. Should artifacts be salvaged, or should Titanic be left untouched as a maritime grave? Some argued for respect, others for remembrance. One thing was clear: Titanic still had the power to captivate, and that power would only grow stronger. In 1997, James Cameron's film Titanic brought the tragedy to life in a new way. With a mix of historical accuracy and fictional romance, the film introduced new generations to the story of Jack and Rose, characters that, while invented, conveyed the spirit of those aboard. The film became the highest-grossing movie in history at the time and won 11 Academy Awards. Audiences wept, not only for the love story, but for the very real people who had lived and died on that doomed ship. And once again, Titanic's legacy deepened. For many, the wreck was no longer just a tragedy, but a mirror held up to humanity, showing our ambition, our flaws, our courage, and our heartbreak. Even today, over a century later, Titanic continues to teach. She reminds us that no amount of wealth, prestige, or engineering can conquer nature entirely. That even in our greatest triumphs, humility must walk beside us. And somewhere, in the pitch-black depths of the North Atlantic, her lights are still imagined, flickering. Not just from memory, but from reverence. As Titanic settled into her grave beneath the Atlantic, the world above changed forever. For decades, the wreck remained lost to time, its precise location a mystery shrouded in myth. Families mourned without graves. Monuments rose in cities from Belfast to Halifax. Songs, poems, and books attempted to immortalize the passengers and crew. And still, questions echoed in the cultural consciousness. What exactly happened on that night? Could more have been done? Were there heroes we still didn't know? Throughout the early and mid-20th century, expeditions were proposed to find the Titanic. Some were motivated by science, others by dreams of treasure. Many failed before they began. The depth, over 12,000 feet, made exploration nearly impossible with the technology of the time. The pressure at that depth exceeds 6,000 pounds per square inch. It's a realm so hostile to life that even sending machines down felt like sending probes to another planet. Then came the Cold War. In 1985, oceanographer Robert Ballard's expedition, originally a cover mission funded by the US Navy to locate sunken nuclear submarines, finally spotted Titanic using advanced submersibles and sonar imaging. The moment her bow came into view, looming out of the blackness like a sleeping giant, it was as if the century-old story took a breath again. Humanity had touched its ghost. Cameras captured eerie footage, rusted railings, broken teacups, and an open hatch that looked as if it had just been swung wide. No bodies remained. The cold had long since claimed them, but shoes and clothing, undisturbed, offered silent witness to where people had fallen. The site was vast, wreckage strewn over thousands of meters. The ship had split not cleanly, but with violence. The stern lay twisted, its decks collapsed like layers of wet paper. This wasn't just a shipwreck, it was a graveyard. Ballard, to his credit, refused to salvage the wreck. He believed it should remain untouched, a memorial to the lives lost. Others disagreed. Over the next decades, artifact recovery missions brought up thousands of items, dishes, jewelry, luggage, even the ship's whistles. These relics became centerpieces in touring exhibitions that captivated millions around the globe. Seeing a child's coat or a dining set in person gave the story physical weight, grounding it in reality. Controversy grew. Was this archaeology or grave robbing? Lines were drawn between preservationists and salvagers. Courts ruled on ownership. UNESCO eventually declared the site protected as an underwater cultural heritage zone. But debates still rage today, especially as technology improves and new expeditions are launched. Meanwhile, Titanic's presence in pop culture only deepened. In schools, students studied her as a lesson in overconfidence and poor planning. Engineers analyzed the metallurgy of her rivets. Artists reimagined her final hours in paintings and reenactments. A surprising number of enthusiasts even built scale models, from Legos to steel, and sailed replicas in pools, obsessing over every bulkhead and rivet count. There's humor in that, how a story of such solemn magnitude became part of dinner party trivia and YouTube rabbit holes. Yet that humor doesn't undercut the gravity of the event. If anything, it proves Titanic's lasting grip. We joke about rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic because we all understand the metaphor, fiddling with details while catastrophe looms. Some conspiracy theories even emerged. Did a coal fire weaken the hull before the crash? Was it really Titanic that sank, or her sister ship Olympic in disguise? Was J.P. Morgan involved in a financial plot? Most theories crumble under scrutiny, but they reveal something deeper. Our obsession with finding meaning, even if it's imagined. The truth, though tragic, remains powerful enough. In many ways, the Titanic's legacy has outlived her hull. She represents the dreams of a gilded age, the cost of arrogance, and the resilience of memory. Every generation finds new meaning in her story. Some see her as a warning, others see her as a tribute. What's certain is this: the Titanic will never fade quietly. She sails perpetually in our collective imagination, a monument not just to what we built, but to what we lost. Titanic isn't just a shipwreck, it's a mirror reflecting our age of wonder and warning. And even now, over a century later, that reflection continues to evolve. As new technologies have emerged, from remotely operated vehicles, ROVs, to deep-sea submersibles like Alvin and Mir, the wreck has been studied more intimately than ever before. Detailed 3D scans now exist of both the bow and stern, revealing every rivet, every twisted railing, every fallen chandelier. These scans have allowed digital reconstructions so precise they've been used in courtrooms, museums, and virtual reality education platforms. One expedition in particular captured the imagination of the world. In 2019, divers reported that Titanic was deteriorating rapidly. Bacteria, specifically Halomonas titanicae, were consuming the iron, turning the once indomitable hull into fragile webs of rust. Scientists predicted that by 2100, much of the structure may collapse completely. A biological clock had begun ticking. This revelation sparked a fresh wave of debate. Should Titanic be preserved in some way? Could we reinforce her hull with technology? Or should we, as Ballard once urged, allow her to disappear with dignity into the sea? There's something poetic in that thought of nature reclaiming what humanity once considered invincible. Beyond science, Titanic also remains at the center of personal journeys. Families of victims and survivors still make pilgrimages to Titanic museums or attend annual memorials held on April 15th. In Belfast, visitors walk the shipyard where she was built, now home to Titanic Belfast, a towering museum that charts her creation, voyage, and legacy. In Halifax, Nova Scotia, many of the recovered bodies were buried, their gravestones etched with names, or sometimes just numbers, when no identification could be made. There's a quiet reverence in those graveyards. People leave flowers, sometimes children's toys, sometimes handwritten notes. It's as if, across generations, we are still speaking to the people who were lost. Still grieving, still remembering. And Titanic has inspired more than memory. It's sparked action. Modern maritime laws trace directly to her sinking. The International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, SOLAS, was born out of the disaster, revolutionizing how passenger vessels are equipped, crewed, and inspected. Today, when you attend a muster drill on a cruise ship or see illuminated lifeboat signs, that's Titanic speaking through regulation. Even entertainment industries have learned from her tale. James Cameron, known for his obsessive attention to detail, conducted over a dozen dives to the wreck before filming his 1997 blockbuster. His team recreated everything, from the pattern of the china to the exact sequence of events on the night she sank. Historians praised the film for its authenticity, and audiences connected not just with Jack and Rose, but with the real-life characters in the background. Captain Smith, the ship's architect, Thomas Andrews, the musicians, the firemen, the stewards, and the countless unnamed souls in third class. The film's impact can't be overstated. It reignited global interest, influenced academic research, and brought Titanic into the hearts of a new generation. Millions who never studied maritime history or visited a museum suddenly knew every inch of that grand staircase. And yet, Titanic is not static. New facts still emerge. In 2022, researchers discovered a previously unseen section of the debris field, suggesting that the breakup of the ship may have been even more violent and complex than once believed. As technology improves, our understanding deepens. It's staggering to think how a 2-hour collision over a century ago continues to ripple through time. Titanic endures not because she was perfect, but because she was flawed. Her story carries everything: ambition, pride, compassion, chaos, courage, and loss. It is the story of humanity told in steel and steam and silence. One can only imagine what those final moments were like. Parents cradling children, lovers embracing, strangers helping strangers. The lights flickering, the cold rising, the stars above, indifferent. Yet in that darkness we also find light. Titanic reminds us to be humble, to care for one another, and to prepare not just for the smooth sailing, but for the storms. Her legacy is not just one of tragedy, but of lessons written across history's deepest grave. There's something oddly timeless about the Titanic. Long after the last survivors passed, people like Milvina Dean, who was just a baby aboard the ship and lived until 2009, Titanic continues to live in museums, in documentaries, in hearts. Her tragedy echoes because it was, and still is, profoundly human. We see ourselves in those passengers, in their hopes, their flaws, their ordinary choices on an extraordinary day. Take the story of the Adagul 14, a group of Irish emigrants from a tiny village in County Mayo. 14 boarded Titanic in Queenstown. 11 would die. Today their descendants gather each year at a lantern-lit ceremony. Names are read aloud, songs are sung, and their journey, cut short by fate, is kept alive. It's one of hundreds of micro-histories woven into the larger tapestry of Titanic's legacy. Each person aboard had a story, a dream, a family. We often think of Titanic in terms of steel and statistics, but it's the people, the cobblers, the bakers, the maids, the millionaires, that make it endure. Then there's the tale of the dog lovers. Yes, Titanic had dogs on board, at least 12. First-class passengers brought Pomeranians and Pekingese, and even a Great Dane. A few small dogs were smuggled onto lifeboats. One, a Pekingese named Sun Yat-sen, belonged to a publishing tycoon. The bond between humans and animals, even amid catastrophe, reminds us that compassion doesn't vanish with crisis. It endures, and humour too, believe it or not, found a place aboard Titanic. Survivor Lawrence Beasley, a schoolteacher, once recalled a woman in a lifeboat who, upon seeing the Carpathia, quipped, "Well, I suppose we're going to miss breakfast." Humour, as ever, becomes a survival tool. In the years following the wreck's rediscovery, Titanic also became an educational tool. Schools around the world used her story to teach physics, ethics, engineering, and history. Students built models, debated blame, studied Morse code and wireless communication protocols. Teachers found that Titanic's layered story offered lessons far beyond the ship itself. It was a floating classroom, past and present. In recent years, immersive exhibits and virtual reality simulations have brought Titanic into the 21st century. Guests can walk her decks digitally, experience the final plunge in motion simulation pods, and even interact with AI avatars of real passengers. These innovations aren't just novelty, they're part of a larger mission to preserve memory in new formats, to keep history not just alive, but accessible. And accessibility is important. For decades, Titanic was a story shaped largely by Western media and scholarship. But the passengers came from over 30 nationalities: Swedes, Chinese, Syrians, Armenians, and beyond. The 6 Chinese passengers aboard faced tremendous discrimination after surviving, denied entry to the US and forgotten in most retellings. Only recently has their story been told fully. It's a reminder: Titanic was global, and her story belongs to the world. Meanwhile, Titanic enthusiasts, yes, that's a real and growing community, host conventions, publish journals, and travel across the globe to attend lectures and exhibitions. Some even dive to the wreck themselves, paying steep sums to witness history in its resting place. They aren't just tourists, they're caretakers of memory. And among them there's a quiet agreement. Titanic is not just a story about what went wrong. It's about how people responded, how some gave up seats for strangers, how a radio operator tapped messages until water reached his keys, how an orchestra played to soothe the dying. These fragments of humanity, scattered across time, are why we still care, why we still weep, why we still listen. In a world so often defined by noise and haste, Titanic's story is a whisper, a reminder that dignity, courage, and love can shine brightest in our darkest hours. It's difficult to define the moment when Titanic transformed from tragedy to cultural legend, but perhaps that's the magic of her story. Its power lies in how it refuses to fade. She was once a marvel of industrial might, then a symbol of devastating loss, and now a tapestry of memory that still ripples across generations. Her tale has been told in every language, her image carved into soap bars, commemorated in postage stamps, painted on canvas, and even reimagined in children's books. There's no end to how the world continues to retell what happened on that cold April night. In literature alone, Titanic's legacy has filled libraries, from early survivor accounts like Violet Jessup's first-hand retellings to expansive non-fiction tomes such as Walter Lord's A Night to Remember. Every decade brings new interpretations. Poets wrote odes, some filled with sorrow, others with warning. The event became metaphor, Titanic as arrogance, as grief, as destiny. Even in fictional works she resurfaces. In one novel, Titanic never sinks. In another, she's resurrected for a future voyage. The ship is a stage upon which we project our most enduring hopes and fears. Titanic also left her mark on the legal and ethical systems. The aftermath of the sinking helped define international maritime law. But beyond that, there were questions of morality, about who should have been saved, about who was turned away, about why only 2 lifeboats went back to search for survivors. These haunting decisions remain part of the discourse, frequently revisited in philosophy classes and leadership courses alike. Titanic becomes a prism through which we examine decision-making in crisis, fairness, inequality, and responsibility. And in every classroom where she studied, every museum where her deck chairs or keys are displayed, Titanic forces us to think about our own modern equivalents. Would we behave differently today? Are we really more prepared, or do we just believe we are? The Titanic also became the origin point for modern emergency protocol thinking. Entire sections of naval training and emergency psychology reference her disaster. Crew behavior, leadership under pressure, crowd panic, and logistical failures, Titanic offers case studies for each. Her sacrifice, while unthinkably tragic, became a foundation for safer seas. Over the years, voices that had once been marginalized began to find their place in Titanic's story. Survivors whose accounts were dismissed, particularly women, children, and non-Western passengers, began to have their perspectives included. Only recently have historians seriously researched and honored the stories of Titanic's 8 Japanese passengers, of the Egyptian antiquities lost in cargo, of the immigrant mothers who died with their children in their arms. These aren't just footnotes, they're essential threads of the narrative. Meanwhile, technological innovation has allowed researchers to reanimate Titanic in virtual detail. Using sonar scans, AI reconstructions, and deep ocean mapping, teams have created fully explorable models of the wreck site. These aren't static blueprints, they're time machines. Viewers can walk the promenade deck, descend the grand staircase, and enter the boiler rooms, all reconstructed with forensic accuracy. The past has never been so vivid, but perhaps the most powerful moments come not from high-tech simulations or dramatic films, but from stillness. In 2001, deep-sea cameras captured a child's pair of shoes resting side by side on the seafloor, surrounded by silt and rusted debris. That image, unmoving, wordless, hit harder than any explosion or headline. It reminded the world these were lives, not statistics. Every so often, an item recovered from the wreck resurfaces in the media. A violin believed to have belonged to Wallace Hartley, Titanic's bandleader, fetched over $1 million at auction. A menu from the final lunch served aboard the ship sold for hundreds of thousands. These objects, mundane in their origin, become sacred through tragedy. They anchor the abstract idea of Titanic to something touchable, knowable. They're tokens of ordinary life interrupted. And yet the wreck is changing. Recent dives show the rapid decay of once recognizable features. Cabins that were visible in the 1980s have collapsed. Decorative panels have crumbled. The crow's nest is now barely distinguishable. Someday, perhaps in the not-so-distant future, the entire site may be swallowed completely by the ocean floor. What was once a marvel of human ambition will be silt and steel shadows. So how do we remember something that disappears before our eyes? The answer lies in stories, in the retelling, in passing on the names of passengers not found in textbooks, in museums and documentaries, yes, but also in song, in art, in whispered family histories. Some descendants still wear lockets passed down from survivors. Others light candles each April. The wreck may dissolve, but the memory endures in acts of quiet reverence. We remember because we need to. Titanic is not just about a ship. It's about us, our reach, our frailty, our choices, and our longing to ensure that no life, no matter how small or brief, is ever truly forgotten. And as long as her story is told, as long as someone leans in just a little closer when they hear her name, the Titanic will continue to sail. Not through waves, but through time. There is a particular silence that comes when speaking of the Titanic, not just the hush of awe, but a stillness that spans over a century. It is a silence that sits in boardrooms when safety protocols are reviewed, in classrooms when children see the image of the ship against the icy Atlantic, and even in living rooms where families, separated by generations, watch reenactments together, wondering what would we have done. That silence is sacred. It's the weight of 1,500 voices cut short. It's the echo of ambition colliding with reality. We often speak of Titanic's demise, but we rarely dwell long enough on her life. For months before her voyage, she was a living, breathing city. Engineers knew every inch of her steel skeleton. Interior designers laid rich wood paneling and velvet upholstery. Electricians lit her hallways with soft, incandescent glow. Cooks tested ranges and bakers filled pantries. Her decks echoed with hammering, laughter, arguments, sweat. Titanic wasn't just a ship. She was a civilization under construction. Her completion brought pride not just to Belfast, but to the modern world. And her voyage wasn't only filled with tragedy, it was, for a few days, filled with joy. Children played on deck, young couples held hands under the stars, musicians rehearsed chamber pieces, the library was full of readers, diaries captured the awe of those seeing the ocean from above the clouds of steam and steel. There were dreams unfolding with every knot gained across the Atlantic. The Titanic wasn't always sinking. For most of her journey, she was alive. Many of the passengers, especially those in third class, carried dreams in small suitcases. They left behind hardship, poverty, even war. Some were farmers hoping to own land. Others were craftsmen seeking wages. Women journeyed alone, some widowed, some seeking independence. They weren't just fleeing, they were building new lives before the waves took them. Titanic was the thread that connected their old world to the promise of a new one. And then it snapped. The chaos of that final night has been reimagined countless times, but the truth still defies full comprehension. The bravery, confusion, errors, and sacrifices took place in a span of under 3 hours. A lifetime of preparation was tested in minutes. No matter how many times we rehearse the sequence, the iceberg strike, the bulkheads flooding, the flare guns fired, the lifeboats swinging out into the night, it still feels surreal. A grand symbol of progress plunged into darkness. Yet within that descent, humanity glowed. Some men, by choice or expectation, stood back and let others live. Officers tried to maintain order even when order had dissolved. Some passengers gave up spots for others, some refused to leave loved ones behind. There were no perfect heroes, but there were hundreds of acts of courage and kindness. And in a world increasingly digital, it's these stories, quiet, intimate, real, that remind us what it means to be human. After the sinking, the world reeled not just from the numbers, but from the impossibility of it all. How could such a ship fail? The irony that a vessel dubbed unsinkable could meet such an end became a permanent scar on modern optimism. Writers called it the end of the Gilded Age. Historians referred to it as the moment when the myth of total human control cracked open. Titanic became a symbol not only of loss, but of reckoning. That reckoning extended into art, media, and culture. Countless films have depicted the disaster, some melodramatic, others documentary style, each shaped by the era that produced them. In the 1950s, A Night to Remember offered a sober, restrained account based on survivor testimony. In 1997, James Cameron's Titanic brought spectacle and emotion, combining historical accuracy with modern storytelling. And even beyond cinema, Titanic appeared in music, in fashion, in themed restaurants and weddings. The ship had become an idea, not just a vessel. And perhaps that's what keeps us returning to it. Ideas don't sink. Some view this continued fascination as morbid, even obsessive, but there is dignity in remembrance. We study Titanic, not to revel in catastrophe, but to confront our own vulnerability. In a time when modern disasters play out in real time, Titanic provides a slower meditation. She asks us to pause, to reflect, to imagine what we would have done, not with judgment, but with humility. There are still efforts to explore her remains. Some with reverence, others with profit. Tourists have paid enormous sums to descend in submersibles. Expeditions debate the ethics of salvaging versus preserving. Debris fields are mapped with more precision than many cities, and yet the sea always reclaims. Each visit changes the site. Each artifact moved, another ghost stirred. There's a growing consensus that we may soon need to say goodbye. The wreck is decaying. Marine life is overtaking the halls where violins once played. One day there will be no trace but what we've preserved in memory and media. The grand staircase will collapse. The rusticles will consume every railing. Titanic will vanish in body, but not in spirit, because Titanic was always more than steel. She was a container of dreams, both realized and broken. She was the collision point of class, technology, and nature, a symbol of a world on the brink of change. She set sail in a time of hats and horses and telegrams, and sank into a century that would bring rockets, algorithms, and artificial intelligence. In a way, her descent bridged two eras. And now, more than 100 years later, she speaks to both. As we stand at the edge of new frontiers, deep space travel, planetary colonization, AI governance, the story of Titanic warns us not to assume too much, not to believe that because something is advanced, it is infallible. The iceberg may not always be ice, but there will always be something waiting quietly in the dark to test what we build. And so, we tell her story not just to remember the past, but to shape the future. The Titanic story isn't just about the past, it's a lens through which we see the present. As the 21st century unfolds, her legacy continues to evolve. schools, universities, researchers, and everyday people still analyze every aspect of her design, her voyage, and her fall. The ship's name has become more than just a memory. It's a symbol, a metaphor, a warning. Each year, new books are written, new footage is unearthed, new exhibits open. In Belfast, where Titanic was born, the former Harland and Wolff shipyards have become the Titanic Quarter, a hub of innovation, heritage, and remembrance. The Titanic Belfast Museum, opened in 2012, is shaped like the ship's bow and filled with interactive exhibits. Visitors walk a replica of her grand staircase, hear survivor testimonies, and even feel the chill of the North Atlantic simulated through immersive displays. For many, it's not just educational, it's emotional. That emotion runs deeper for the descendants of those who were aboard. Families still pass down stories. Some keep letters and telegrams. Others wear jewelry saved from that night. These heirlooms are not just artifacts. They are anchors to the people behind the headlines. When descendants gather at memorial events, there's a quiet intimacy, a shared understanding that Titanic is part of their bloodline. Through them, the ship sails on. Cultural memory is a strange thing. It chooses what to keep and what to forget. But with Titanic, the memory has expanded, not just the big names, Astor, Guggenheim, Molly Brown, but the quiet ones. Crew members like Frederick Fleet, the lookout who spotted the iceberg. Violet Jessup, the stewardess who survived not just Titanic, but also the Olympic and Britannic. Father Thomas Biles, who gave final blessings to third-class passengers as the ship went down. These names don't always appear in textbooks, but among Titanic circles, they are revered. There are also those whose names were nearly erased. 6 Chinese men survived the disaster, yet were deported almost immediately after arriving in New York. Their presence, long omitted from the mainstream narrative, is finally being recognized. Documentaries and articles now tell their side, expanding Titanic's story beyond a Western lens. It's a reminder that every name lost or silenced deserves to be spoken again. And then there's the science. Modern oceanography owes a great deal to Titanic. The 1985 discovery of the wreck changed not only history, but marine exploration itself. The submersibles and sonar systems developed for the mission paved the way for deep-sea research that benefits climate studies, underwater archaeology, and even space programs. The ocean floor, once thought unreachable, is now more known because Titanic was lost. In recent years, private companies have begun planning new missions to the site. Some seek to create permanent 3D scans of the entire debris field before it's gone. Others, more controversially, propose bringing back items for profit. A few speak, quietly, of salvage tourism. The idea that one might build a future Titanic attraction using actual recovered panels, railings, even remnants of the hull, has sparked debate. Ethical questions arise. When does recovery become exploitation? Can a shipwreck be both museum and mausoleum? For now, international law provides some protection. Titanic lies in international waters, and the 2001 UNESCO Convention on Underwater Cultural Heritage offers guidelines. Still, Titanic remains unclaimed in many ways, a monument to both global unity and legal ambiguity. Technology continues to change how we engage with the wreck. AI reconstructions, immersive VR environments, and haptic feedback tools now allow users to experience the sinking in lifelike simulation. Some call this macabre, others say it's vital. When done respectfully, such simulations foster empathy, not sensationalism. They allow us to feel what numbers cannot express: the cold air, the pitch of the deck, the sounds of water and cries in the night. What will Titanic mean to future generations? Will her story hold the same power in 100 more years? Will new disasters push her deeper into memory? Perhaps. But some stories resist forgetting. They become part of humanity's moral DNA, like Hiroshima, like Apollo 11, like 9/11. Titanic is fixed in the timeline, not just because of what happened, but because of what it revealed about us. She revealed that no amount of engineering could replace humility. That class divisions could mean the difference between life and death. That courage sometimes lives in the quietest acts. Holding hands, giving up a seat, singing as the ship sinks, and still Titanic speaks. Not just in museums or movies, but in how we approach risk, how we honor the fallen, and how we measure the price of progress. She is invoked in courtrooms when maritime laws are challenged. She is remembered in engineering labs when redundancy systems are tested. She is studied in ethics courses when human choice is on trial. As long as people build, dream, risk, and sail, Titanic will remain. She is more than iron, more than rivets and decks, more than lifeboats and law. She is a question we keep asking. What happens when we believe we are too great to fail? As we move deeper into the 21st century, the Titanic continues to hold our attention, not as a passing obsession, but as a permanent thread in the human story. Her legacy stretches far beyond the shipyards of Belfast or the icy waters where she rests. It touches every continent, every generation, every person who has ever stood in awe of the impossible made real and then undone. The Titanic has become a cultural landmark, not just because of what she was, but because of what she represents. She marks a collision between human aspiration and the raw indifference of nature. A grand vision brought low not by sabotage, war, or malice, but by ice, by physics, by time. In that way, her fate feels almost mythic, more Greek tragedy than mechanical failure. She is Icarus with a boiler room, Atlantis in rivets. Across time, the metaphorical weight of Titanic only grows heavier. Politicians invoke her name when warning of national hubris. Authors cite her to challenge blind faith in technology. Environmentalists draw comparisons between the iceberg and our planet's own looming crises. She is used to frame discussions on global inequality, as her decks mirrored the class divide in chilling clarity. Even pandemic response analyses have borrowed Titanic's lifeboat model to assess how society allocates survival. The visual language of Titanic, her silhouette, her smokestacks, her majestic forward thrust, has become shorthand for bold human ambition. Her interior design, painstakingly recreated in films and exhibitions, now defines a generation's understanding of Edwardian opulence, and her collapse has become one of the most replayed, reinterpreted, and restaged tragedies in modern media. In art, Titanic is ever present. Murals in public schools, sculpture gardens that use recovered rivets, choral works that set survivor testimony to music, ballets based on her descent, even fashion lines inspired by her era and elegance. These are not mere tributes, they are acts of continuation. Each artistic effort, no matter how niche, contributes to the ongoing construction of Titanic's afterlife. Then there is the digital world where Titanic thrives in unexpected ways. Online forums dissect her schematics with near-religious zeal. Simulation gamers rebuild her hull plank by plank. YouTube documentaries gain millions of views. Social media memes reinterpret her final plunge with irony and dark humor. While some may balk at this, it's proof that Titanic is not frozen in history. She evolves. She is constantly reframed, re-understood, re-experienced by new eyes, in new languages, with new tools. Some of the most meaningful Titanic conversations happen between strangers online, united only by the need to feel something deeply. They discuss what it would have been like to be in the wireless room, hearing distress signals unanswered. What it would have been like to row through darkness with no direction, or to watch loved ones disappear over a railing, unsure if they'd ever return. And every year, on April 15th, the internet goes quiet in small corners. Images are shared, names are posted, a bell is rung. Titanic is mourned all over again, not as a shipwreck, but as a human moment that transcends time. For survivors and their descendants, the burden and blessing of carrying Titanic's story has changed over the years. In the decades following the disaster, many survivors never spoke of it. Trauma had no therapy then. It was swallowed, endured. Men who rowed lifeboats lived with guilt. Women who lost children lived with silence. Some remarried and rebuilt. Others drifted, haunted by what they had seen. Only later in life did some open up, prompted by anniversaries, by curiosity, by the need to ensure the truth wasn't lost. Their testimonies are the soul of Titanic's history, not the blueprints, not the timelines, not even the iceberg, but the voices, tremulous, resolute, uncertain, stories of a steward guiding strangers to safety, of a father handing off his child with no promise of reunion, of a girl who survived by pretending to be older. These aren't tales, they are truths, and they are why Titanic will never be fully archived. Today, Titanic scholarship is more global than ever. Researchers from Japan, Egypt, Argentina, and India all contribute to her record. Maritime historians collaborate with AI specialists, metallurgists, and even forensic psychologists. Entire university departments are dedicated to studying the convergence of engineering, ethics, and narrative as demonstrated by Titanic's short but potent lifespan. Meanwhile, documentary filmmakers and authors now prioritize lesser-known passengers. They ask not just how the ship sank, but who was on board and who wasn't. They examine immigration patterns, gender roles, colonial wealth, and the changing dynamics of the early 1900s. Titanic, in this lens, is not just a ship. It's a snapshot of the world in transition. And still the sea keeps her secrets. Ballard's discovery in 1985 opened the door, but no expedition since has fully mapped every inch. There are rooms not yet entered, corridors yet to be filmed. The forward cargo holds, the crew quarters near the stern, the mailroom still sealed behind debris, all hide moments of history not yet witnessed. Some things perhaps are meant to remain submerged. What we have found, however, continues to amaze. In one expedition, a porcelain doll's head rested in perfect silence on the silt floor, its painted smile intact. In another, a man's pair of leather gloves lay folded as if set down for only a moment. These are the images that arrest us, not the grandeur, not the scale, but the intimacy. The reminder that Titanic's legacy lives not in steel, but in the soft remnants of human presence. Titanic is a contradiction. She is both overstudied and unknowable, both glorified and mourned, both timeless and time-bound. And in that contradiction lies her power. Each generation returns to her not for answers, but for meaning. She makes us ask, how far should we go in pursuit of greatness? What are we willing to risk to be remembered? And what do we owe those who never got the chance to decide? Titanic does not answer these questions. She simply floats in the mind. As we near the end of Titanic's long echo through history, we are reminded that some stories never truly conclude. Titanic was not a single tragedy. It was a chorus of thousands, all singing in different voices from different places, joined together in a night that still haunts us over a century later. And even today, the song continues. Titanic is now not only remembered through the vast vault of documentaries, films, books, exhibitions, and preserved relics, but also in the private corners of lives touched by her story. In homes across the world, people still light candles on April 15th. School children perform plays. Families tell the tales of relatives who went down with the ship or survived to carry on. In this act of remembrance, the Titanic continues to live. One of the most poignant developments in recent decades is the expansion of Titanic's legacy into the emotional and psychological sphere. Psychologists have studied the trauma experienced by survivors. New therapies have referenced survivor guilt in the Titanic context to help veterans, victims of modern disasters, and those affected by personal tragedies. The metaphor of the Titanic moment, a turning point of irreversible consequence, has entered our collective vocabulary. In the world of education, Titanic has also become a cross-disciplinary study tool. In engineering, her construction and failure are case studies. In leadership programs, Captain Smith's decisions, right and wrong, are analysed. In literature, she serves as both historical backdrop and metaphorical device. In ethics courses, the choices made in lifeboat allocation spark fierce debates. And in art classes, Titanic becomes inspiration for everything from sketching the grand staircase to sculpting the iceberg itself. Museums continue to evolve their storytelling. The Titanic Artifact exhibition, which has travelled across dozens of countries, mixes haunting recovered items with recreations of the ship's rooms and hallways. Visitors walk into chilled rooms with the names of the dead inscribed around them. They hold boarding passes with the names of real passengers. They leave wondering whether the person on their card lived or died. It's experiential, personal, and transformative. And in Belfast, a city that once tried to forget the ship they built, Titanic has become a point of pride and healing. The Titanic Quarter not only preserves history, but revitalizes it, standing on the same ground where the steel was first laid. Schools in Northern Ireland now teach about the men who built the ship, the immigrants who boarded it, and the lessons learned from its demise. A place once marked by shame is now defined by reflection. In fiction, Titanic's allure continues. New novels reinvent her story. Some place her in alternate timelines, where she never sinks or where she returns in ghostly form to warn future generations. Others use Titanic as a stage for new characters, new romances, new mysteries. She has been featured in comic books, science fiction sagas, even musicals. And yet, even amid fantasy, the core truth of Titanic persists, that she was real, and her fall was devastating. Then there's the personal pilgrimage many take to the Titanic cemeteries. In Halifax, visitors quietly place flowers, sometimes teddy bears, on the graves of unnamed victims. In Fairview Lawn Cemetery, one stone simply reads J. Dawson. It became famous after the 1997 film, but it belongs to a real man, Joseph Dawson, a coal trimmer from Dublin. Thousands leave messages there, some in reverence, others in romance. That blending of myth and truth is part of Titanic's power. She belongs to both. And perhaps that's the final lesson Titanic offers. That truth and myth need not be enemies. That stories passed through generations, even if coloured by time, still carry weight. They shape who we become. They shape how we grieve, how we celebrate, how we remember. As science advances, there are now simulations that can map the precise movements of Titanic's hull in her final moments, down to the angle of break, the pitch of the bow, the forces acting on individual bulkheads. These digital ghosts tell us what happened with increasing certainty. And yet the more we know, the more we feel. Logic hasn't dulled the sorrow. If anything, it sharpens it. New expeditions are still proposed, now involving remotely piloted drones the size of soda cans, capable of entering narrow spaces untouched for over a century. These drones promise new discoveries, perhaps messages, perhaps medals, perhaps nothing at all. But each dive is a question cast into the deep. What are we still hoping to find? Maybe the answer is reassurance. Reassurance that we haven't forgotten, that the people lost were not lost in vain. And the ocean, vast and indifferent, continues to hold Titanic in its cold arms. The silence of the seabed is broken only by the occasional camera light, the brief flicker of interest, before darkness closes again. That image of light meeting shadow is the perfect metaphor for Titanic's place in our world. A story born in brightness, extinguished in night, but still glowing in memory. In a world spinning faster and faster, Titanic asks us to slow down, to examine, to feel, to remember. She asks us to look closely at the systems we trust, the assumptions we make, the people we overlook. She is a mirror if we dare to look. And perhaps that's why the Titanic endures, not because she sank, but because in her sinking, she revealed the truth about us. What we build, what we value, what we ignore, and who we become after the impact. Oh wow, you're still here? You listened to this entire thing? You get a gold star, my friend. Type in gold star in the comments so I know who made it and who drifted off to counting little Titanic boats hopping over the bed. Thanks for tuning in. Sweet dreams.